A cold front was pushing in off the Chesapeake the afternoon it happened, graying the water at Cooper's Landing and rattling the halyards in the marina. And down by the public boat ramp, 3 young men from the big houses up the hill found a limping dog and decided it would be entertaining. What happened there lasted less than a minute and does not need describing in full. It is enough to know that 3 people who had never once in their lives been told no decided a herd animal was a toy, and that one of them held up a phone and laughed while it went on. The dog did not run, and it did not bite, which should have told them something. 40 miles up the road, a man named Jonah Pierce had been looking for that exact dog for 191 days and did not know he was that close. And not one of those young men understood that the limping stray they had just kicked for fun wore a faded tattoo inside its left ear, the mark of a working dog of the United States military, and that it had a medal, and that what they had done by that boat ramp was going to pull the lid off the most powerful family in the county. Stay with me through this one to the end, and if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of story this channel exists to tell. To understand the man who came looking, you have to understand what the dog had already done for him. Jonah Pierce had been a Navy SEAL, the kind sent to the places that do not appear in the news, and on his last deployment, everything he was had come down to a single morning and a single dog. There had been a road that should not have been taken, and a blast that took the choice away from everyone on it. Jonah did not remember being dragged. He remembered waking up in a field hospital with most of his hearing gone, and being told that he was alive because a Belgian Malinois named Ajax, already torn open along one hind leg, had clamped onto the drag handle of his vest and hauled a 200-pound unconscious man out of a kill zone one backward step at a time, and had then lain down across him and refused to let anyone but the medics near. He remembered, too, that not everyone on that road came home. A young teammate named Mickey Dunn did not. Mickey had been 23, the youngest on the team, the one who kept a photograph of a girl back in Ohio taped inside his helmet and who had spent the night before that road talking Jonah's ear off about the diner he was going to buy when he got out. Ajax had reached Jonah first because Jonah was closer. That was all it was. 4 feet of distance and a few seconds, and Mickey had been on the far side of the truck. Jonah knew, in the cold arithmetic that lives in men who have done this work, that the dog could only carry one man out at a time, and that the dog had chosen, and that the dog had been right, and none of that arithmetic had ever once let him sleep. He carried Mickey Dunn the way men like him carry such things, silently in the part of himself that never fully came back, in a debt that had no one left to pay it to except a dog. Ajax was medically retired after that, his leg rebuilt with pins, the limp permanent. Jonah adopted him the day the paperwork allowed it, because there was never any question you do not leave behind the reason you are breathing. But Jonah's own recovery was long and ugly, months in a hospital states away, and during those months Ajax was supposed to be safe with family. He was not. Through a death and a move and a series of failures no one meant, the dog slipped through the cracks of other people's grief and was gone before Jonah was well enough to stand. When he finally got out, the trail was already cold. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He searched. For 191 days, he drove a grid across 3 states, checking shelters and pounds and rumors, sleeping in his truck because a SEAL does not leave a man behind, and Ajax had long since stopped being a dog to him and become, simply, the one he owed. Have you ever loved something with a loyalty that survived being abandoned? Or watched a creature keep trusting people who had given it every reason to stop? If a dog like that has ever been part of your life, tell me about him in the comments. I read every one. The faithful ones deserve to be named. The man who picked the dog up off the pavement that cold afternoon was old enough to be those young men's grandfather. Roy Tibbets was 76, and he had run the same bait and tackle shop at the foot of the marina for 40 years, and lately he had been losing it the slow way, to a developer who wanted the whole waterfront and to a body that did not work like it used to. There had been a wife once, Marlene, who kept the books and made the coffee, and died of a stroke 9 springs ago in the back room that Roy now slept in alone. There had been a steady line of watermen at his counter before dawn, in the years when the bay still gave up crabs the way it used to, men who bought their bloodworms from Roy and told him their troubles. Until the boats thinned out and the new money came in, and a shop that smelled of salt and diesel started to look, to certain people, like an eyesore on prime land. Roy had been Navy himself once. A long time ago, on the rivers of a war the country had mostly chosen to forget, and he still stood a certain way when the flag came down at the marina each evening, and he still answered the phone Tibbets the way his father had taught him. He had almost nothing. He took the dog in anyway. He carried the trembling, bleeding animal into the back of his shop where he slept on a cot among the spare reels, and he cleaned the wounds with hands that shook a little, and he gave the dog half of the one sandwich he had. And the dog watched him the whole time, the way an old soldier watches another old soldier, deciding. It was Roy who noticed the things the young men had not. The dog sat without being told, squared and still. When Roy moved too fast, it would not eat until Roy said a word that sounded like permission. And when Roy lifted the torn ear to clean it, he found the small, blurred tattoo inside, a row of numbers and letters that meant nothing to him, and everything to the right person. Roy had seen enough of the world to know what he was looking at. This was no stray. Somebody had spent a great deal of money and care making this animal into something, and then the world had lost track of it. The next morning, on legs that hurt, Roy walked the dog the half-mile to the only veterinarian in Cooper's Landing who would see a charity case, and he asked her to scan for a chip. She did, and then she went very quiet, and she read the screen twice, and she picked up the phone. That was the moment the story turned, though no one in that little examination room could have said why the air had changed. The chip traced, through a registry in a base kennel, and finally a cell phone, to a man in a truck 2 states over who answered on the first ring the way a man answers who has been waiting for this call for 6 months. Jonah Pierce did not say much. He asked one question, was the dog alive? And when the answer was yes, he was already driving, and he did not stop except for fuel, and he reached Cooper's Landing in the dark with the nor'easter finally breaking over the bay. He came through the door of that little shop soaking wet, and the old man stood up from his cot, and the dog who had been lying with its rebuilt legs stretched out toward the heater lifted its head. Ajax knew him before he spoke. The dog came up off the floor on 3 good legs and 1 bad one, and it crossed that shop without a sound and pressed the whole length of its body against Jonah's shins and stayed there shaking. And Jonah Pierce, who had not let himself cry in a hospital or at a funeral or on any of 191 nights in a truck, went down onto the floor of a bait shop and put his face in the dog's neck and finally did. Roy Tibbets turned around and busied himself with the coffee pot, the way men of his generation give other men their privacy, and outside the rain came down on the harbor that one family was trying to own. They talked late into that storm, the 2 sailors, in the way that comes easy between men who have both stood watch in the dark. Roy did not ask much. He had learned not to. But somewhere past midnight, Jonah told him about the road, and about Mickey Dunn and the diner in Ohio that would never get built, and about the 191 days, and Roy listened the way the dog listened, without needing to fix it, and the old man said only that he understood now why the animal had let 3 fools kick him and never raised a tooth. A dog like that, Roy said, had already decided long ago that there were things worth more than its own skin, and had simply been waiting for someone worth being that for to come back. Jonah did not answer. He didn't have to. Ajax had his chin on the man's boot and was, for the first time in half a year, asleep, because that was the next thing Jonah learned, sitting on Roy's cot drinking bad coffee while the storm passed. Who had done it, and what they were already doing about it? The young men from the boat ramp were Preston Wexler and 2 of his friends, and Preston was the son of Roland Wexler, who had built half the new waterfront and meant to build the rest, including the patch of ground Roy's shop sat on. The video existed. A young woman who had been at the ramp had seen the whole thing and refused to delete it and had already put it where it could be seen. And the Wexler family, who fixed problems the way other people breathe, had moved fast. By the time Jonah arrived, their lawyers had already filed a complaint with the county claiming the dog was a dangerous stray that had menaced young people unprovoked, and they had requested an expedited hearing to have the animal seized and destroyed. The hearing was set for Friday, 3 days out. Kill the dog, and the dog could not be the war hero in the story. It became just a vicious stray that some kids had defended themselves against, and the video became nothing. If you had been the young woman with the phone that afternoon, if you had seen 3 people you would have to live near for years do that to a limping animal, would you have stepped in or filmed it or walked away and told yourself it was none of your business? Be honest. Type step in or walk away below. I read them all. She had refused to walk away, and now Jonah refused to as well, but he did not do it the loud way. He could have. A man with his record and his contacts could have brought a storm down on the Wexlers by Thursday. Instead, he spent 2 days quietly assembling the truth, because the truth, laid out plainly in front of enough people, is the one thing money has never figured out how to buy. He had the dog service record pulled. He had the citation, the official one with the date on it, the morning on the road, printed and certified. He had the veterinarian document the fresh injuries laid over the old war wound, and he had her note, in her careful clinical hand, that the animal had shown no aggression of any kind during examination, and had in fact been trained to a standard she had never personally seen in a dog. He had the young woman's video, and he had Roy, who had watched the whole thing and would say so. He saw the evidence, and he saw the lie at the same time the way he had been trained to, and he waited. What he did not expect was that the lie would come walking through Roy's door on its own. Thursday evening, the night before the hearing, Roland Wexler arrived at the bait shop in person with one lawyer and one checkbook, because he had decided that the cleanest way to make all of this disappear was to make the old man disappear from it first. He came in out of the cold the way a man comes into a place he already believes he owns. And he spoke past Jonah and past the dog as though they were stock to be cleared. And he laid an offer on Roy's counter, a number for the shop, a number for the dog, a number for silence, the whole problem solved before sunup. Ajax rose. The dog came up off the floor and put himself between Roland Wexler and the old man without being told, and from somewhere deep in his chest came a low, continuous growl. Not a bark, not alarm, but a decision already made and waiting only for a reason. Wexler took a half step. The dog took a step first. Wexler stopped. The lawyer's hand froze on his briefcase. And in the doorway to the back room, old Roy Tibbets, who had said almost nothing this whole time, spoke quietly, looking not at the millionaire, but at the dog. He never tried to bite them. The shop went still. Even the dog did not move. Then Jonah spoke for the first time, and his voice was low and level. The voice of a man who learned in places without rules that the truest authority never needs to be raised. He did not threaten Roland Wexler, and he did not insult him. He laid it out, in order, the way you brief men before something that cannot be undone. He named the date on the citation. He described, in 3 flat sentences, what the dog now growling in front of them had done on a road on the far side of the world, how it had dragged an unconscious man out of a kill zone on a leg that was already destroyed, and then guarded him. He did not say the unconscious man's name, but the way he said it told the old man and the young woman and the lawyer exactly whose life it had been. And the small room understood that it was standing in the presence of a debt none of them could have imagined an hour before. He told them, too, about Mickey Dunn. Because the dog's record and Mickey's name were the same story, and because a family that was about to put a war dog down to protect a spoiled son ought to know precisely what they were weighing against their convenience. He set the medal and the video and the veterinarian's findings side by side on the counter next to Wexler's check, and he said, without heat, that tomorrow he would be reading all of it into the record at a public hearing, and that the only question Roland Wexler needed to decide tonight was whether he wanted to be the man who tried to have that dog killed to cover for his son, or whether he didn't. And then Jonah said one word, soft, almost gentle, and Ajax stopped growling and sat. The disciplined animal these people had kicked for sport could have ended any of them, and had instead, on a single command, chosen not to. Wexler understood it then. He looked at the dog that had just declined to hurt him, and at the old sailor, and at the medal on the counter, and the certainty drained out of his face the way color drains out of a man who has just seen. Clearly, the size of the thing he set in motion, he had built himself up from nothing once a long time ago on grit his son had never been made to learn. And somewhere under the anger was the older, worse fear that he had raised a hollow boy and had spent a fortune teaching him there were no consequences. He picked up his check with a hand that was not quite steady, and he left. And the dog watched the door until it closed, and only then lay back down. The hearing on Friday lasted 20 minutes. Jonah read the citation into the record. The veterinarian testified the young woman played the video. The county dismissed the dangerous dog complaint so fast it was almost an apology, and someone in the back of the room, A waterman with his son in the service started a slow clap that the little chapel quiet hearing room picked up and would not stop. The video had already done the rest of the work overnight, the way these things do now, and by Friday afternoon, the name Wexler meant something different in Cooper's Landing than it had on Thursday. What happened over the next weeks moved through that harbor town the slow, sure way. Good things move along the water in crab shacks and church basements and conversations on the dock at dawn. Preston Wexler and his two friends faced the animal cruelty charges the video made impossible to bury, and his father, to the surprise of a town that expected the usual, did not make them go away. Perhaps because something in that bait shop had finally reached the part of him that remembered being poor and hungry and decent. The development that was going to swallow Roy's shop quietly lost its permits to a county that had discovered its spine, and a veterans group 3 states wide, hearing the story, raised in a single weekend more than enough to buy Roy Tibbets's shop free and clear and put a new roof on it, with a brass plaque by the door that the old man pretended to grumble about and polished every morning. Jonah Pierce did not leave when he had what he came for. He had spent 191 days learning that you can find the thing you were looking for and still not know how to stop running. So he stayed. He rented the rooms over Roy's shop, and he helped the old man fix outboard motors he had no use for, and he learned the names of the watermen, and he started showing up at the Little Watermen's Chapel on the harbor on Sunday mornings. Not because he had the words for it yet, but because the light came through the windows there in a way that made the running quiet down. Slowly, the part of him that never came home from that road began, without announcement, to come home. Roy, for his part, had not had family at his table in 9 years, and now there was a man fixing his coffee in the mornings and a dog asleep by his stove, and the old sailor caught himself, more than once, talking to Marlene's photograph about the both of them. There are mornings on that dock that feel less like coincidence than like arrangement, and a man does not have to know the word for it to feel it settle in his chest. On most mornings now, there are 3 on that dock when the sun comes up over the bay. An old sailor, a younger one, and a gray-faced Malinois with a bad leg asleep in the first warm light, in a town where everyone now knows exactly what he is. What those 3 young men kicked by the boat ramp not knowing was a creature that had carried a man out of hell on a broken leg and asked for nothing in return. And what saved that dog in the end was not its mettle and not its training. It was one old man with almost nothing left who looked at a hurt animal everyone else had decided was worthless, and bent down and helped. This story is for every soul who keeps faith long after the world has stopped keeping faith with them, and for everyone who has ever bent down to help something small and limping that no one else would. Was there ever a dog in your life who deserved better than the world gave him? Or a person who took in a stray when they had nothing to spare? Put their name in the comments below. Let's fill this section with the loyal ones and the kind ones and leave it there for people to find. Every story on this channel is about the worth that the world walks past without seeing. If that means something to you, subscribe so you're here for the next one. There are more of these to tell. And before you go, which moment in this one stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.